In the spring of 2026, life in Sunnyvale Estates felt like a dream finally realized, until the morning it turned into an absolute nightmare. I had built my modern two-story dream home on the edge of this upscale Texas community, and right behind it sat my most prized possession, 1.5 acres of pristine private land I had personally purchased years earlier as a privacy buffer and future investment. Lush green grass rolled gently toward a small pond, shaded by ancient oaks, the kind of quiet retreat every overworked professional craves. I paid my HOA dues on time every single month, followed every rule, and never once imagined the association I trusted would betray me so completely. That crisp April morning, I returned from a business trip, pulling into my driveway with excitement to be home. The moment I stepped out of the car, the distant roar of heavy machinery hit me like a slap. Construction trucks clogged the side street. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. My stomach dropped as I walked around the side of my house and stared at the scene unfolding directly on my private land. Dozens of workers swarmed over a massive wooden frame rising from the grass I had mowed myself just weeks earlier. Pressure-treated beams soared 30 feet high, metal roofing panels gleamed under the Texas sun, and stacks of benches, lighting rigs, and even a full outdoor kitchen lay scattered across what was legally mine. A large white sign hammered into the ground read in bold letters, "Sunnyvale HOA Community Party Pavilion, coming soon." The structure was enormous, easily 60 by 40 feet, with space for a stage, seating for over 100 people, string lights, speakers, and enough electrical hookups to host weekend parties until midnight. This wasn't some tiny gazebo. This was a full-blown event venue built without a single notice, without my signature, without compensation, and without any respect for the ironclad property lines shown on the survey I kept framed in my office. My private land, paid for with my own money, deeded solely to me, had been hijacked by the very HOA that was supposed to protect homeowners. They had ignored every boundary, every legal document, every ounce of common decency. I stood there frozen, heart pounding, watching the crew hammer away like it was business as usual. The sheer arrogance left me breathless. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate land grab disguised as neighborhood improvement. My mind raced through every HOA meeting I had ever attended, every fee I had paid, every rule I had followed. None of it mattered. They had taken what was mine and turned it into their personal party palace. As the sun climbed higher and the pavilion skeleton grew taller against the blue sky, one thought burned clearer than anything else. This was war, and I was not about to let the Sunnyvale HOA get away with stealing my land.
Chapter 1. The days that followed my shocking discovery blurred into a nonstop nightmare of disbelief and mounting fury. Every morning I woke to the relentless sound of nail guns and saws slicing through the quiet Texas air, each hammer strike driving another nail into the coffin of my privacy. The pavilion grew taller and more imposing by the hour, its metal roof now fully installed and catching the sunlight like a taunting beacon. Workers in bright vests moved with the confidence of men who believed they had every right to be there, unloading benches, stringing lights, and laying electrical cables straight across the grass I had fertilized and watered for years. My private land had become their construction zone, and no one seemed to care that the deed in my filing cabinet proved it was mine alone. I spent the first 48 hours documenting everything with my phone, hundreds of time-stamped photos and videos showing the exact location of the build relative to my surveyed property pins. I walked the perimeter again and again, heart racing, comparing the orange surveyor flag still visible from my last boundary check 2 years earlier against the massive footprint now carved into my lawn. The pond I loved, the oaks that shaded my evening walks, everything was now overshadowed by this looming party monster. The structure was designed for pure excess, a full outdoor kitchen with built-in grills, a raised stage for live music, covered seating for at least 100 guests, and enough lighting to turn night into day. It was the kind of amenity wealthy neighborhoods brag about, except it wasn't built on common land, it was built on mine. When I finally reached the HOA office by phone, the receptionist's tone was polite but dismissive, as if I were complaining about a misplaced trash can rather than the theft of an acre and a half. She transferred me to the board president, who listened without interruption while I laid out the facts, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. The response that came back was chilling in its casual arrogance. The board had voted unanimously months earlier to enhance community amenities and had relied on an outdated plat map that mistakenly labeled my private parcel as available open space. No one had bothered to double-check with the county recorder or send me so much as a courtesy notice. They simply broke ground, confident that homeowners like me would roll over for the greater good. I drove to the county clerk's office that same afternoon, pulling every document I could find: original deed, tax records, my purchase agreement from 5 years ago. The clerk, a kind older woman who had seen her share of property disputes, confirmed what I already knew. The land was unequivocally mine. No easement existed, no dedication to the HOA had ever been filed. Yet the construction continued. By the end of the week, the pavilion stood complete, its string lights twinkling mockingly at dusk, while I sat on my back porch watching strangers in hard hats pack up their tools. The finished structure looked even more extravagant up close: polished wood beams, weatherproof speakers mounted every 10 feet, and a large sign now proudly declaring it the official Sunnyvale HOA Party Pavilion. Neighbors began to notice. Some slowed their evening walks to stare, whispering behind their hands. A few even congratulated the HOA on social media for the beautiful new addition, completely unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that it sat squarely on private property. The isolation I felt was crushing. I had always been the quiet guy who kept to himself, paid his dues, and minded his own business. Now I was the man whose land had been stolen in broad daylight, and the community seemed ready to side with the thieves. Sleep became impossible. Every night I lay awake calculating the financial damage, lost privacy value, devalued resale price, the sheer insult of watching my investment turned into a public party venue. I researched every HOA horror story I could find online: families bankrupted by fines, backyards fenced off without permission, endless court battles that dragged on for years. My case felt different, though. I had ironclad proof. I had the survey, the deed, the photos. What I needed now was someone who could translate that proof into action. After 3 sleepless nights, I made the call every homeowner dreads. I hired a property rights attorney with a reputation for taking down overreaching HOAs. The consultation was set for the following Monday. As I hung up the phone and stared out at the finished pavilion glowing under its new lights, a cold determination settled over me. The HOA had started this fight on my land. I was going to finish it in court. But even as I planned my next move, I could already sense the board doubling down, preparing to defend their shiny new toy at any cost. Little did I know how ugly things were about to get.
Chapter 2. The Monday morning consultation with my new attorney, Rachel Morales, felt like the first real step toward reclaiming what was mine. Her office was sleek and modern, lined with books on real estate law and framed court victories against HOAs across Texas. I laid out every document, every photo, every timeline of the illegal build. She listened intently, her expression growing darker with each piece of evidence. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, she was as outraged as I was. "This is textbook trespass and conversion," she said flatly. "They built a permanent structure on your land without permission. We're filing a cease and desist immediately and preparing a full lawsuit for damages, injunction, and attorney fees." The relief I felt was immense, but it was short-lived. That same afternoon, the HOA struck back. A certified letter arrived by courier, demanding I stop interfering with their new community asset and threatening daily fines of $500 for any further complaints. The letter claimed the land had been dedicated for common use years earlier through some vague verbal agreement I had supposedly made when I bought the house, an agreement that existed only in their imagination. Attached was a blurry photocopy of an old plat map with my parcel incorrectly shaded as open space. Rachel laughed when she saw it. "This won't hold up in any court," she assured me, "but they're banking on you folding under pressure." The pressure came fast. Within days, the pavilion hosted its first official event, a neighborhood spring mixer, complete with live music that thumped across my property until well after 10 at night. Cars lined my street. Strangers spilled onto my grass carrying coolers and lawn chairs, completely unaware they were trespassing. I called the police twice that weekend. Both times the officers arrived, took one look at the HOA sign, and told me it was a civil matter. "Talk to your association," they said, shrugging as if my deed meant nothing. The humiliation burned. My own land had become a public thoroughfare, and law enforcement treated me like the troublemaker. Word spread through the community Facebook group. Posts praising the beautiful new pavilion flooded the feed, followed by comments questioning why that guy on Oak Lane was causing problems. Some neighbors I had barely spoken to suddenly acted like old friends, stopping by to urge me to be reasonable and accept a tiny settlement the HOA was supposedly willing to offer: $5,000 for permanent easement rights, $5,000 for land worth over $200,000. The insult was staggering. I refused every overture, and the gossip turned nastier. People I once waved to now avoided eye contact. My once peaceful neighborhood had split into two camps: those who benefited from the pavilion and those too afraid to speak up. Rachel filed the lawsuit the following week. The complaint was ironclad: trespass, unjust enrichment, conversion of property, and intentional interference with my quiet enjoyment. We demanded immediate removal of the pavilion, restoration of my land to its original condition, compensatory damages, and punitive damages for the HOA's reckless disregard of my rights. The board responded with a motion to dismiss, claiming sovereign immunity as a nonprofit and arguing the structure served a public purpose. The audacity continued to amaze me. They had stolen my land and now wanted the court to declare it was for the greater good. Depositions were scheduled for late May. I spent every spare hour preparing, reviewing old emails, pulling bank statements showing every HOA payment I had made, and hiring my own surveyor to produce a new certified boundary report. The stress was constant. My work suffered, my health suffered. Yet every time I looked out my window and saw that pavilion glowing like a stolen crown, my resolve hardened. The HOA had turned my private sanctuary into their personal party palace, and they were fighting tooth and nail to keep it. As the first deposition date loomed, I knew the real battle was only beginning. The board was about to learn that some homeowners refused to be bullied.
Chapter 3. By early June, the legal filings had turned into a full-blown war of paperwork. The HOA's attorneys flooded us with motions, discovery requests, and counterclaims that bordered on ridiculous. They accused me of harassing the community by documenting their trespass, and even tried to claim I had verbally agreed to the build during a casual conversation at a neighborhood block party years earlier, a conversation that had never happened. Rachel dismantled every argument with surgical precision, filing reply after reply backed by my mountain of evidence. Yet the board refused to back down. They were dug in, convinced their shiny new pavilion was worth any legal risk. The pavilion itself became a nightly torment. Every weekend brought another event: birthday parties, retirement celebrations, even a wedding reception that spilled over onto my grass with folding chairs and children running wild. The string lights stayed on until 2 in the morning, music pulsed through the speakers, and the smell of barbecue smoke drifted straight into my windows. My once quiet evenings were destroyed. I installed security cameras aimed at the pavilion and logged every instance of trespass, noise violation, and property damage. The footage was damning. People clearly walking across my lawn, knocking over my plants, and treating my land like an extension of their party space. The community divide deepened. A small group of supporters began leaving notes on my door, urging me to drop the suit for the sake of neighborhood harmony. Others whispered behind my back at the grocery store. The HOA even sent me a formal violation notice, fining me $1,000 for creating a nuisance by pursuing legal action. Rachel laughed when she saw it and immediately filed a motion to strike the fines as retaliatory. The judge assigned to our case seemed increasingly annoyed with the HOA's tactics. During a status hearing, he warned their attorney that continued frivolous filings would result in sanctions. For the first time, I felt a glimmer at hope that the system might actually work. Still, the financial strain was real. Legal fees were climbing into the tens of thousands, and my property value had already taken a hit, according to a professional appraisal Rachel commissioned. Potential buyers who toured the house inevitably asked about the massive pavilion next door and walked away once they learned the dispute existed. I was losing money every single day the structure remained on my land. The stress affected my sleep, my appetite, and my work performance. Friends who lived outside the neighborhood urged me to settle, but I refused. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about principle. No one had the right to steal private land and call it community improvement. By late July, the court had set a trial date for October. Both sides were ordered to produce witnesses and experts. I hired a real estate appraiser and a land use expert who would testify that the HOA's actions constituted a taking without compensation. The board lined up their own experts, claiming the pavilion added value to the entire neighborhood. The battle lines were drawn. As summer heat blanketed Texas and the pavilion hosted yet another loud event that kept me awake until dawn, I stood at my window, watching the lights flicker across my stolen grass. The fight had consumed my life, but I was more determined than ever. The HOA had picked the wrong homeowner to trample on. October would bring the reckoning they never saw coming.
Chapter 4. August and September became a blur of depositions, expert reports, and tense pre-trial conferences. The HOA board members were deposed one by one, and their testimony only strengthened my case. The president admitted under oath that they had never obtained a current survey and had simply assumed the land was available based on an old map. Another board member confessed they knew the parcel was privately owned, but decided the community needed the pavilion more. Their own emails, which Rachel subpoenaed, revealed internal discussions about how to handle me if I complained. The arrogance on record was breathtaking. Rachel played the emails in open court during a hearing, and the judge's expression said everything. Sanctions were threatened again. My own deposition was grueling but straightforward. I answered every question calmly, backed by documents and photos that left no room for doubt. The court-appointed mediator tried twice to broker a settlement. The HOA offered $25,000 and a perpetual easement, still laughably low. I countered with full removal plus $200,000 in damages. Both offers were rejected. The case was headed to trial exactly as I wanted. Public opinion outside the neighborhood began to shift once local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Austin American-Statesman ran a feature titled "HOA Builds Party Pavilion on Private Land. Homeowner Fights Back." Suddenly, I wasn't the neighborhood villain anymore. Supportive messages poured in from strangers who had suffered similar HOA abuses. The financial and emotional toll remained heavy. I had taken a leave of absence from work to focus on the case, burning through savings I had planned for retirement. Yet every time doubt crept in, I walked outside and looked at the pavilion, standing boldly on my grass like a monument to entitlement. That sight renewed my fire. My attorney assured me the evidence was overwhelming. The law was clear. You cannot build a permanent structure on someone else's land and keep it simply because it benefits others. The HOA's nonprofit status offered no shield against trespass claims. By the second week of October, the trial date arrived. The courtroom was packed with curious neighbors, reporters, and even a few HOA reform activists. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Rachel, my survey maps and photo albums neatly organized. The HOA's legal team looked confident, but their confidence faltered when the judge entered and immediately reminded both sides that he had read every filing. Opening statements began, and the battle moved from paperwork to live testimony. Witness after witness took the stand, but the evidence spoke louder than any lawyer. My land had been stolen in plain sight, and the entire community was about to watch justice unfold.
Chapter 5. The trial lasted 4 intense days. Day 1 belonged to my side. Rachel called the surveyor first, who used enlarged maps and laser pointers to show exactly where the pavilion sat entirely on my deeded property. The appraiser followed, detailing how the structure had devalued my land by over $150,000 through lost privacy and market stigma. I took the stand and described without exaggeration the daily invasion I had endured for months. The judge listened attentively, occasionally glancing at the HOA table with visible disapproval. The defense struggled. Their land use expert tried to argue implied dedication, but Rachel shredded the claim on cross-examination with the simple question, "Where is the written dedication document?" There was none. Board members who testified came across as evasive and entitled, repeating the same tired line about community benefit while refusing to acknowledge basic property rights. By the end of day 3, the HOA's case was crumbling. Their attorney requested a recess to discuss settlement, but I refused to budge. I wanted the judge's ruling on record. Closing arguments were delivered on the final morning. Rachel was brilliant, framing the case as a fundamental question of whether an HOA could simply take private land because it wanted a nicer party space. The defense painted me as unreasonable and anti-community. The judge took the matter under advisement and promised a ruling within 2 weeks. The wait was agonizing. Every day I drove past the Pavilion, now silent and empty after the board quietly canceled events during the trial. The structure that once blazed with lights now stood like a guilty monument under gray October skies. When the ruling finally came, it was delivered in open court. The judge's voice was clear and uncompromising. He found in my favor on every count. The HOA was ordered to remove the Pavilion at their own expense within 60 days, restore my land to its original condition, pay all my legal fees, and compensate me $275,000 in damages plus punitives. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The board sat stunned. Reporters scrambled for quotes. I sat motionless, letting the words sink in. Justice had finally arrived. Chapter 6. The 60-day removal deadline became a public spectacle. Crews arrived in early December under court supervision, and the once proud Pavilion came down beam by beam. I stood on my property line every day watching the destruction, a quiet satisfaction settling over me as the string lights were unplugged for the last time. Neighbors who had sided against me now avoided my gaze. A few even apologized privately, admitting they had been wrong. The HOA board was forced to issue a public statement acknowledging the mistake and promising better due diligence in the future. Their insurance covered most of the payout, but the reputational damage was permanent. My land was restored by mid-January 2027. Grass reseeded, pond cleaned, trees untouched. The $275,000 judgment more than covered my legal fees and compensated for the months of stress and lost value. I used part of the money to install a permanent privacy fence and security system that would make future encroachments impossible. The experience changed me. I became active in HOA reform groups, sharing my story online and warning others about overreaching associations. Viral videos of the Pavilion's removal racked up millions of views, turning my fight into a cautionary tale for homeowners everywhere. By spring 2027, my property was once again the peaceful sanctuary I had originally purchased. The oaks shaded the pond, the grass grew thick and green, and no party lights disturbed my evenings. The Sunnyvale HOA still existed, but its power was diminished. New board members were elected on promises of transparency and respect for private property. I never regretted a single day of the battle. The HOA had built a huge party pavilion without permission on my private land, but in the end, they paid the price, financially, legally, and publicly. My land was mine again. My rights were affirmed, and the message was clear. Private property still means something in 2026, and some fights are worth every single ounce of effort. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served.